Hey everyone, welcome to today's session. We are just going to give it a few more minutes and we just have people popping through. So we'll probably give it about 2 more minutes. But while we're waiting, I just want to introduce Josh. For those of you who don't know him, he is part of our CS team here at Reply. He is also our content specialist, and I'm Stephanie. I'm the head of CS here at Reply. So looking forward to getting started today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming today.
So for any of you guys who have been here before, I always have like a tea with me whenever we do these sessions. And I feel like every time my mug gets bigger and bigger. So like just for reference, like this is.
Yeah, just got my little glass.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about content best practices. So we're going to go through a sequence and really help you guys out with, setting up your sequence, utilizing some of our best practices, but also taking a look at some of our AI features, which we rolled out not too long ago. And yeah, hopefully we'll get you guys getting those replies in and open rates and click rates and all of those nice things.
Absolutely. So yeah, I guess we can dive right into it. Let me share my screen here. So before we kind of go into specifics about the content, I do want to stress that there are a number of different use cases that Reply can be used for. Most of the time, people are coming in with a cold email, sales-centric focus, which is definitely our bread and butter. But you do want to keep in mind other kind of potential options for yourselves. Like internally at Reply, we use the system for all of our onboarding and automation. So we're speaking to existing customers, trying to get them to engage with us, interact with new features and items. So there's a number of different things that you can do with the system. Cold email is just one of the plethora of ideas that you can have. So with that in mind, we'll touch on a couple of different options for each of your different steps. But for the most part, unless you guys have some more specific questions in mind, we will get underway.
And Josh, just before you get started, like with all of our sessions, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll try our best to answer those questions as we go, or we'll definitely save some time at the end to make sure we get to all of those questions. And our session is being recorded today, so it will be available on Reply's YouTube channel after this is finished.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to start, again, before we go into specifics, just to touch on what Stephanie brought up, we do have new JSON AI features that will help expedite the process of content creation and really get you guys a foundation to build off of. So we have one here called From Magic Sequence. If you go to New Sequence and then choose the From Magic option, this will allow you to provide context details that can be extrapolated into a full-on sequence. So you can choose to write your sequence as you would kind of any other day. Just throw in whatever content you were thinking of. And then if you choose the JSON AI option, it will help improve that message using information that you've provided. So if you mention kind of your company name, what you're planning on selling, or what kind of service that you're trying to provide, maybe even drop some names of other companies that you're looking to work with or ideal customer profiles, it's going to take all of that information and then build upon it to really give you a multi-step sequence that caters to that particular audience. All of this being dependent on the amount of detail that you provide. If I were to just give a very basic prompt, it's going to give me a very basic answer. But we can give a little bit of a preview here.
And for those of you who haven't tried JSON AI yet, I highly recommend that you do. I'm always very impressed by the quality that it generates, so definitely try it out.
So you can give it just a very basic prompt here, and it will try to take whatever information that you've provided and again, relay that into something usable. So I essentially gave it no real information other than the name of the company. And it gave me a pretty decent base, but this, again, this is going to be very dependent on the amount of detail that you provide. So if you give a little bit more time, provide a little bit more detail, specifically, this is exactly what I'm trying to sell. These are some key features that come with the service or the product. It's going to take all of the information that you give, and then again, just spit out something that you do have full control over. So if you want to make some final tweaks here or send it out as is, you have full control to do so. If you hit next, that will then relay into multiple other steps. Again, depending on the level of detail, some of that will be LinkedIn steps or call reminders, whatever it thinks it's going to be best to get your idea across. And just like all of our regular sequences, you can go in, make those edits, and you're never locked into anything. So don't feel like you need to perfect it on your first attempt. So just a really cool way to help speed things up if you're not super confident in your copywriting or really just don't know where to start. This is a pretty good way to get yourself going. But for the meat and potatoes of the call, let's get to specifics of what you should be including in each of these steps. So we'll look at the hello viewers section here. So in general, cold email is becoming a known commodity. People are learning to find the tells of what an automated email looks like, and they are ignoring all of the kind of telltale signs. So you want to do your best to get away from the kind of mundanity of all of those other emails and make yourself stand out. And the way to do that is to make your emails look as genuine as possible. So that requires a multi-channel approach. We have things like call reminders, SMS, and LinkedIn automation that will help kind of alleviate those pressures. And what you really want to do is start off your sequence in a way that looks as manually delivered as possible. So dropping that voicemail or sending them a LinkedIn connection request or even just viewing their profile is a great way to cement the fact that you are a real person. Obviously, nobody likes telemarketers, so you don't want to come across as one, but just giving a very casual, hey, I've been following your performance at company, think there's something really cool going on there. I'd love to have a quick chat. And then you follow up either that voicemail or that LinkedIn message with an email shortly after, maybe a day, and they're going to take that email much more seriously than they would have if you were to just drop the email out of nowhere. They didn't ask for this email and they don't know who you are. So if you were to just show up in their inbox, there's not a lot of trust going on there, and you're going to have that much more difficulty getting them to perform whatever your call to action is, whether that be clicking on a link, downloading an attachment, or just booking some time with you. So you got to keep all of these different aspects in mind and think about your email from the perspective of you being the recipient. You don't like cold emails, so you need to try to craft the message in a way that you would respond to it. And helping lay out all of this additional context is a great way to alleviate a lot of that pressure and start building that trust to gain a little bit of traction down the line. So once you've kind of laid the groundwork with that initial touch point, you obviously need to figure out what to say in your opening email. A lot of people will go the kind of direct route, and this can work if you know exactly who you're reaching out to. But in general, you want to take a slower approach and again, build that trust. So provide a little bit of context as to why you're reaching out. Hey, I came across your profile on LinkedIn, really like what you're doing there. I work at this company. This is exactly what I do, just in a couple of sentences. And then instead of asking for the phone call or trying to get them to engage with a piece of media, you want to ask them questions that are going to promote some thought and really get them to think about ways that they can improve or areas that they need some assistance with, things that you can help out with directly through your product or service.
Yeah, and
By,
just to add to your, sorry, Josh, I don't mean to cut you off, but just
no,
to kind of
I
add to
get
your
on the
point.
I get on the train.
What I wanted to mention was, we did a case study a few years ago with one of our customers because he was getting a 63% reply rate. And so we, obviously wanted to know what he was doing. And he was using reply for cold email. So he was reaching out to people who he had never spoken to. They didn't know who he was. So he was asking 2 or 3 questions in that first or second email that was related to their business. And what he wanted to do was get a dialogue going because he said, they've never heard of me before. The last thing I want to do is kind of jump in with like an email that seems very sales pitchy. So he wanted to kind of get to know them. And then obviously during that process, it also acted like as a mini discovery because then he could kind of, think, okay, they're a good potential customer. Maybe they're not based on what they've told me. So it's really just a good way to break the ice and just create that dialogue so that after you have that dialogue, then you can say, hey, you know what, based on our conversation, I think we would be a great fit for you because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah, exactly. Just asking more specific things rather than just, hey, do you want to purchase this? Or, hey, do you want to hop on a phone call? Like
Yes.
those
Yep.
types of questions are very easy to ignore, right? If they're not interested, they're just not going to engage with you at all. Whereas if you ask something more specific, there's something for them to hold on to. There's actually something for them to respond to. And people want to feel like they're speaking to a person rather than just being sold to. So you need to appeal to the human on the other end of the screen rather than trying to push forward with the sale. Again, there are going to be times and places where the more direct approach can work. If you've done a lot of research beforehand and you know your audience needs this particular thing at this particular time, by all means. But in general, if you're reaching out to a much wider audience, you're not sure, and you're just really trying to probe, I think a more conversational, slower approach is going to garner more results over time rather than just trying to shove whatever you've got in their face. So
That's a nice way of putting it.
yeah. Exactly. But yeah, so the main point is you want to ask questions that are going to promote thought about a particular pain point, and then in your follow-up step you're going to bring up ideas and concepts about how you can directly alleviate any of those problems. Specifically, the wording there is how you are going to assist rather than what you can do. And there is a big difference here. A lot of the time that I hop on phone calls with clients, they have kind of very straightforward, again, to the point messages saying, oh, we're really good at this. Do you want to work with us? Going back to the previous point, they don't know who you are. They've never heard of you for the most part. Unless you're reaching out to a list of warmer leads. But they have no reason to believe that you can do what you say you can do. So you want to go the extra mile, build that trust, and talk about how you're going to help them rather than just what you can do. So I did X, Y, and Z working with a client in your area to accomplish A, B, and C. You want to try to provide direct detail and talk about the ways you can directly impact their business. And you want to give them kind of a mental image of how you're going to slot in to their routine. And that's going to make them feel more comfortable. You're also displaying expertise and you're kind of proving that you are the type of person that they want to be working with rather than just someone who kind of came out of the weeds and is trying to make a buck. So going into detail, providing these specific examples about how to help are really going to cement your place in their mind as the answer to the questions that you brought up in the previous step.
And there's actually data that shows that people who use maybe a case study or a use case in their follow-up emails tend to see about up to 30% higher reply rate across their sequence. Because like Josh said, you're putting in data that actually highlights what you're capable of as a company, and the experience that you've had before, which like Josh said, it leads people to, it kind of builds that trust with your prospective customers or prospective clients. And sometimes it just takes a number to really stand out to someone who is reading those emails. So, if someone's reading your emails and they see, that you've been able to, increase productivity at company ABC by 40%, that could be what stands out to them to say, hey, you know what, I should get back to them and see what they can do for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind, you want to give them these numbers, these data points, but you also still want to maintain that conversational style. So don't just throw in a ton of bullet points trying to hype yourself up. Seed these data points into an actual sentence and make it seem like you're talking to someone in person, like you're already having that meeting over coffee, right? Make them feel comfortable with you, and again, want to engage, like they're being spoken to rather than they're being spoken at. You want them to feel like they're having a conversation rather than they're sitting in on a TED Talk. It just helps go a long way in getting them to actually want to respond at the end of the day. The other element that you want to include here is any sort of media that you have, you want to avoid in your initial step. Your first step is going to be your key to the entire kingdom here. If you get your first step into spam or promotions or updates, that is the majority of eyeballs you would be getting no longer doing so. So you want to keep your first step clean. Step 2, as you can see here, the subject line is completely blank. This is going to allow us to send that step as a direct response to step 1. And in order to further cement your point, throwing in a link to your testimonials page is a decent way to help get people more focused on a specific item. So I wouldn't go so far as to throwing multiple links or an attachment. That can still cause damage to the domain at large. But in general, if you're going to provide a link to a use case video or testimonials page, whatever the case is, this is the spot to do so. As a little bit of an aside, whenever you're working with email, you want to keep your HTML-based factors limited. Usually no more than 2 at the most. I personally don't go above 1. And you really want to focus whatever media that you're providing to one specific thing that you want them to engage with. So I don't want to send them an email with a link to a testimonials page, a link to my calendar, and an attachment. There's too many things for them to engage with. Again, you're still trying to build some trust here, so they may not be comfortable interacting with a single item, let alone trying to pick between 3. So really focus in on the exact thing you want them to click on and draw attention to that. If your goal is to make them book calls with you, just keep drawing attention to the calendar link in your subject line or in your signature. That way you don't have to waste any more HTML space, and you're still drawing their attention to the most important item in the email alongside all of the additional details that you're providing. If your focus is on that testimonials page, maybe you can still include the signature calendar link, but maybe don't mention it. Don't push too hard for the call. Just say, hey, this is what we're really trying to do for you. Here's a link to a couple of other people that have been happy with the service that we've provided. Just keep in mind your goal when writing the email, and then focus on that rather than trying to get them to do everything. which is the fastest way to get them to do nothing. And then we move on to step 3, and we're also going to take a moment to talk about the timing of the emails here. So you can see step 2, day 1, day 4, and day 8. So in general, there's not going to be a magic number here, but you do want to keep your emails in a relatively quick and concise fashion, but you don't want to overwhelm them with the number of emails that they're getting. So usually the first 3 emails that I want to send, I will space them out over the course of maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks. That way I'm not waiting too long between each message where they're going to completely forget about what I have to say. And I'm not going too quickly where I'm overwhelming them. They're just going to get upset and then they're going to block all of my messages. So you do want to try to kind of feel out your audience as best as possible. Do some research beforehand before setting up your schedule. But in general, anything from day 1 to around day 10 to 12 tends to work pretty well. As for specifics on step 3, again, you want to leave this subject line completely blank. So it's going to be a response to your step 2. And this is where you want to get ahead of the conversation. So you brought up some initial probing questions. You've kind of directed them to areas that you can assist with. Then you've taken the time to lay out exactly how you're going to assist with those kind of sensitive areas. Now, if they still haven't decided to hop on that call with you, here is where you want to try to kind of sweeten the deal. Again, you want to try to remain conversational, but you do want to start addressing more specific partnership related ideas. So I call this the FAQ segment. You have been on conversations with clients before. You know the types of things that come up in these sales calls. So get ahead of the curve here and start talking about those pain points. If pricing is a fluid thing for your particular business, talk about how you're willing to have those kind of talks. If you're very rigid, you maybe talk about specific kind of pricing options that they can expect to come up with. You can also talk about perceived bonuses in this section. So a lot of people will throw in kind of discount talk, or if you buy now, this will come with your subscription. Whatever you think can be used as a potential bonus, whether it is or isn't, this is a great place to slot it in to help sweeten the deal and entice them to hop on that call outside of the realm of just laying out exactly how you're going to assist. Using reply as the example here, our sales team will mention that certain tiers of subscription will get access to the client success team. Whether the client success team is available for everybody or not is beside the point. They're using kind of an internal structure to help add on to the main product that is the email automation and whatnot. So anything that you can think of along those lines is a great element to include in this third step. Typically, as far as length goes, because we do have these kind of comparative metrics on the side here, I do tend to go more of a pyramid style in my email structure. Your very first message, your introduction, should be straight and to the point. And then as you're going down, your email becomes more detail rich and is naturally going to be longer. So don't get too afraid of your word count here. It doesn't need to be green all of the time. It is going to be very difficult for you to convey all of the ideas you need and want to in such a strict limit here. So if you go a little bit above, don't worry. Again, the main point is if you would respond to the email that you've written if you were on the receiving end. That's probably the best metric that you can go with.
I like to think about it 3 short, concise paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
Most people tend not to read past the 3rd paragraph in an email. Like if I get an email that's 12 paragraphs, I'm not reading the whole thing. lucky if I'm skimming most of it. So yeah, to Josh's point, that 110 word count, it's not a hard and fast metric. So I like to think, 3 short and concise paragraphs. And Josh, you mentioned that you like to kind of build out a pyramid for your sequences.
Mhm,
I like to look at it very similarly, but I like to look at it as though I'm building out a story.
mhm.
So each step that I'm creating, and I'm going to thread all of those emails together, so they all appear in the same thread. And so it's like, kind of like I'm adding layers to that story
Yeah.
as I go, where I'm adding a bit more additional information each time to kind of build out that overall picture.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a great way of putting it. Each step should be directly kind of supporting the previous one. Again, you're laying out the groundwork. That's your introduction. You're setting the tone. And now you're getting in your step two, you're getting to the meat of the story. You're providing specifics on what you can do. And then in step three, while you're not ending the sequence, you are putting a little bit of an end to this kind of batch of messages. So you're trying to tie it all up. Hey, if you do sign with us, this is what you can expect. I'd love to work with you. You do have the flexibility to continue this same thread, so you don't have to renew with a new subject line on your step five here or step four if you don't go with the initial context opener. But the idea that you want to remember here is every step should be introducing additional value. If you ever find yourself kind of just repeating exactly what you've said before, or you're just saying, hey, did you get the previous message I sent? If you're interested, let me know. You're probably at the end of the rope there, and you don't want to push any more than that, because there are diminishing returns when it comes to prospect engagement. And you don't want to burn any bridges, right? So if nobody responds in your first three steps, that doesn't mean they blocked you or they're not interested. There are many reasons why they potentially didn't engage. But you continuing to push without providing additional detail or any reason to is just going to push them further and further into annoyance, right? Um, so keep that in mind. Again, you want to be in their mindset when receiving the messages. So you want to always have something new to say, or you're saying something that you already have in a brand new way, which kind of brings me to my step five here. I'm gonna wait roughly a week to a week and a half after I sent my third step or the end to this story, and I'm going to reintroduce with a new subject line, and I'm going to kind of waffle between the elements from steps 2 and steps 3 that we talked about. So I want to provide as much context and detail as possible to how I'm going to help them, but there are many different things that I can do. There are many different use cases that my product or service are applicable to, and I only touched on one use case in my original step two. Now I'm going to talk about something completely different. And the idea here is that you want to try to hit on as many unique perspectives as possible to just kind of increase the number of potential clients that you're reaching out to. So not everybody's going to have the exact same kind of style or preference or need for your service. So you are going to want to try to hit on as many of those different options as possible, and providing a completely unique kind of idea here. Again, following the same structure where you want to talk about how you're going to help is a great way to just kind of broaden the potential horizons of your prospect pool. And step three, again, you're always going to want to include elements that talk about questions that they may have. Again, you're showing them that you've had these conversations before. You're the type of person that they want to be working with because you're professional and you understand what they need. So kind of interposing both of these elements into your step 4 or 5, I think, is a great way to continue to extend the life of your sequence. And you can, again, continue to do this as many times as you'd like, as long as you have new information to disperse. Whenever you feel like the well is drying up, maybe try to transition into your final step here, which
Josh,
is Mhm.
can I just hop in for a quick question from a viewer?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is from Giovanni. He says, love the idea of keeping the message in the same thread and building a story. I currently keep them as separate emails. Is there a way to change that, or do I need to build a new sequence? So
Yeah.
you can make edits to the current steps in your sequence, and that will affect any new people who are going into the sequence. I would say, just to kind of keep it simple, I personally would probably create a new sequence and just move anyone over who hasn't received those steps. So if someone maybe has received step 1, I would just kind of filter them out and just move them to start on step 2.
Yeah, I think that approach is better than adjusting your existing sequence, because
Mhm.
your stats are going to be largely affected by the way that you started the sequence off. So having that secondary sequence to directly compare and contrast to is going to be a great way for you to see the impact that your changes are making, where you won't necessarily get that as much if you're constantly making changes to the existing sequence. I do think things like adjusting content and adding additional steps in an existing sequence makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to something drastic like completely changing the way your thread works, I do think having a separate sequence just makes a lot more sense there.
All right,
Um,
that's all for the questions. Sorry, Josh.
no, no worries. I think that also brings up another good point, just the need to thread these together versus sending them out independently. Um, think of, again, your own inbox. If you are getting a message from someone you don't know about something that you didn't ask for, I think it's a lot easier to kind of accept if it's one cohesive thread with all the information in one location, rather than getting pinged separately multiple times over the course of the week, right? I'd rather have one message from you that I can refer to whenever I need, rather than having to click on 4 to 5 different items. It's just a lot easier to manage and is much more respectful of my inbox space. So if you don't want to come across as spammy, I think keeping some threads is much better than having like 5 different independent emails.
Yeah, and I think it also makes it easier when you're creating the sequence, because you don't have to repeat any information that maybe you put in a previous email. Um,
Mhm.
and two, like if you think about the messaging you're sending to your prospects, if you happen to send them an email saying, oh, I sent you an email a few days ago about X, Y, and Z, if it's in a separate email, like Josh said, if they don't know you, if they've never heard of you before, they might go, what email are they talking about? And then it's
Mhm.
probably going to be like lost in their inbox, right? Where if you thread them together, if they get it and they say, oh, I sent you an email a few days ago, they could just scroll down and be like, oh, that's the email they're referring to. So
Yeah,
much easier.
100%. And kind of, again, speaking to what we mentioned earlier on with the HTML-based factors, if you're using a thread, the main focus you need to worry about when it comes to the HTML, the links, and the attachments is your first step. As long as that one is clean and that one has entered the primary inbox folder, your direct responses to that will follow suit. You don't really have to worry about where your step 2 is going to land, because it's already in the inbox. Whereas if you're sending 5 individual messages and you're including the HTML-based factors in your step 2 or step 3, there's a chance that these end up in promotions or spam. Nobody's ever going to see them, whereas they just have this basic opener that doesn't really provide them a ton of information that they're going to need, right? You're just asking them these probing questions, but then there's no real, there's no follow-up. So there's a lot of different variables at play here. And I think keeping things cohesive and threaded together just kind of alleviates a lot of those pressures. Did we get another question?
No, it's just Giovanni responding to our response.
Thank you. So getting back on track here, the final step. So again, when you have decided to put an end to this particular sequence, you've run out of fresh ideas, you want to introduce the Hail Mary or the breakup message. So this one is going to be a little bit less specific as to what elements you need to include compared to the others. This one is supposed to be very tonally unique and personality driven. So this one's going to come down to you writing the email. You want to make this the most kind of you message compared to all of the other ones. While we are trying to strike that conversational style, we still very clearly had a goal in mind. We are aiming for a sale, and we're still heavily focused on providing detail about our business. This one should be more in line with kind of speaking to a friend, right? I'm going to be very sarcastic. I'm going to be joking. Hey, I really thought we had something beautiful here. I guess you weren't ready to commit to, and then I'll throw in details about my company, right? You're very tongue in cheek. It sounds completely different compared to the rest of the messages that I've sent. And the idea here is to make them realize that you are in fact a real person. If the LinkedIn or voicemail drop that you did at the top of your sequence didn't hit, if the conversational style didn't hit, doing a complete 180 should get them to realize, oh crap, this was an actual person. Maybe I'll give their other messages another once over and see what they had to say. There's no right or wrong way to really write this one. I've seen people go with literally one sentence, and I've seen other people write a little bit of a short story. So the idea is you're trying to put it all out there. Hey, this is my final attempt to get you on the phone. I'm going to do what it takes. So don't be afraid to let the personality show. And this is one that I would recommend not looking at other examples to try to emulate. I've given people like specific emails that I've written that have worked for me. And they're very, again, sarcastic and jokey. The person that was sending that message was not that personality. So when they got on the phone, there's a little bit of an expectation difference, and that can, again, lead to different results, right? So you don't want to try to trick people. You're just trying to show them that you are a real person and that it's worth taking the time to respond. So
what you're saying is you don't want to be an email catfish.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Okay.
You still want to be the person that's writing the email, and that you don't want to set up a different expectation to where if they're finally agreeing to a call, but they only agreed on the sarcastic, jokey email, but now you're very like straight to the point. You don't want to bullshit or anything. There's a little bit of a dissonance there, and that may put them off of, at the end of the day, signing that contract or buying that product or whatever the case is. So just something to keep in mind. But I do think changing the tone up completely and giving a little bit more of yourself at the end is a great way to help reel people back in and make them realize that this is something worth paying attention to, and hopefully hopping on that phone call or finally responding in a way. So that's all of the elements that we like to talk about when it comes to the general structure of your emails. Again, this is primarily focused on cold email. We do have different recommendations for completely different use cases. Like, for example, for onboarding, you do want to be more data-driven. We're going to throw multiple steps in every few days and then kind of peter that out as time goes on. But each time we're introducing new elements of things that the clients can interact with within the platform. Or if you're just doing it for marketing style, that would be an example where you want to give every step a new subject line, because you're ideally telling them about something completely different. and you want them to engage with that new item in a different way than you did the previous week or month or whatever it is. So if there are any questions about those other use cases, feel free to throw them in the chat here. But the final element that I would like to talk about as far as the general sequences is the call step. So we did mention the voicemail drop at the top, but you still want to maintain a multi-channel approach throughout your entire sequence. So having a random call step in the middle, like let's say just between step 4 and 5, while it can be useful, it tends to detract from your overall sequence when you're working at scale. If I have 1,000 people in my sequence and I have a phone call step in the middle, I now feel obligated to call 1,000 people. Not all 1,000 people are going to be interested in what I have to say, and that's going to take a lot of time to kind of churn through. If not everybody is going to be kind of respectful of the time I'm putting in, it's going to be demoralizing if I'm going through hundreds of people and nobody wants to talk to me, nobody's interested, right? So you want to focus your attention on the people that are looking at the emails that you've sent, that are interested in the steps that you've already provided. And the best way to do that is not to include a random step, but instead to focus your efforts on the view column on the people page. So opens and views are going to be your primary action items. Opens are unique per step. So I have 5 email steps here. So I can only ever have a maximum of 5 opens. But views is the total number of times that this individual has returned to my thread. And this doesn't increase if I'm opening and closing, opening and closing, opening and closing. There does have to be a buffer period of a few minutes before the view count will increase. So they have to physically like leave the thread and then come back at a later time. So this is genuine, the number of times that either the individual has opened it, or in the case that they've kind of forwarded it to a colleague or whatever the case is, however many total people have looked at it. So going to your people page within the sequence, hitting the view column to see how many people are actually looking. And as long as your view count is a couple more than your opens or your delivers, that's usually a pretty good indicator of interest. So like if I send one email and they viewed it 3 times, that would imply to me that there's something in that message that they're interested in. So I would want to make the effort to phone that person rather than someone who has 5 deliveries, but has never opened it a single time or has only opened it once, right? So you really can use this to focus your attention, save yourself some time, and not potentially lose morale by calling hundreds of people and not getting the traction that you're expecting or hoping for. So it's a really good way to just help set the priority and save yourself a little bit of time and effort there.
All right. So we have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First question is, actually both of them are from Bova. Do you include only one LinkedIn step? So for this example, there was only one LinkedIn step at the beginning, and I believe it was a view profile.
Mm-hmm.
You can add more LinkedIn steps to your sequence, but there's a couple best practices that we'd recommend that you follow if you want to use multiple LinkedIn steps. Don't bombard your sequence with too many LinkedIn steps, because you still want the sequence to come across as, there's human action behind it. So what we'd recommend, if you want to use multiple LinkedIn steps, like Josh did here, have that first step as a view profile and then send an email after that. And maybe step 3 or step 4, send a connection request to that prospect. Maybe follow that up with an email and then maybe send a LinkedIn message. So just have a gradual progression of that interaction with those LinkedIn steps. Another thing to keep in mind when you are using LinkedIn automation, we would recommend that you save that LinkedIn automation piece for sequences that are highly tailored and highly focused. So with LinkedIn, there are limits as to how many actions you can take per day, per week. And, we want to make sure that you're not exceeding those limits. So, 30 actions a day, 40 actions a day are really ideal. And so, if you have a sequence with 500 contacts and you're adding LinkedIn steps to all those 500 people, it's going to create a bottleneck. So like I said, save it for those highly tailored, highly focused sequences. Josh, did you want to add to that?
No, I think you hit it on the head there. So just using that example that we showed you previously, starting with that view profile, you can only perform 30 of those items each and every day. If you have hundreds to thousands of people in your sequence, that is really going to slow down the email steps. So some people that use reply will have 2 separate sequences, one specifically for email and then a separate one specifically for LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best approach when utilizing those. But I do think you definitely want to continue hitting people on as many fronts as possible throughout their entire lifetime in your sequences. Not everyone is going to be an email person, and you want to kind of, again, increase your engagement as often as possible. So people like LinkedIn. It's a social platform. People tend to accept connections regardless of whether they know them or not. So it's a great way to boost your own numbers, and just hit people on a front that they're potentially more willing to engage with than the email front. One other point that I do want to mention now that I'm speaking about it, the example that we gave in the actual physical sequence was the view profile. You may want to start with a connection request up top, just because the view profile will only show you if they have a paid LinkedIn account. Otherwise, they will get a notification that says someone viewed their profile, which can help, but isn't going to be as directly kind of impactful as an actual connection request from you and your little kind of display picture showing up there. So you can go either way, but if you want a little bit more punch out the gate, sending that message if you're already a connection request, or if you're already a connection, or sending an in-mail message if you have sales nav, tends to work a little bit better. In-mail can be a little bit iffy because those are inherently marketing based and automated. So I would be a little bit more cautious there. But yeah, view profile or direct connection request tends to be probably the best way to go to start.
All right. And we have another question from Boba. Do opens and views affect deliverability? I tested them with other tools and had 40% spam results. I wouldn't say that open tracking really affects deliverability. Open tracking is pretty common. We haven't seen a lot of issues here. We are constantly updating our tracking links just to make sure that deliverability is sound, and we are constantly testing. I would say in terms of deliverability, pay attention to link tracking. And I wanted to mention that. So by default, link tracking is turned off in your sequence settings. You can turn it on if you do want to have that visibility into who is clicking on a specific link in the emails that you're sending. However, I'd recommend that you only enable link tracking if you're keeping your links to about 1 to 2 links per email. If you have multiple links plus link tracking turned on, then it can start affecting your deliverability. So that's something to pay attention to. And just overall, in terms of content best practices, looking at the amount of links that you're sending. And again, not just because your prospects probably won't take the time to click on 10 links and be directed to each one, but the more you have, that can affect your deliverability rate right there. But we also have the option in your accounts to create your own unique tracking links, so open tracking, click tracking, and whatnot. So
yeah, I can show that.
Take a look at that. Yeah.
So if you go to your email in the top right, go down to settings. There should be an option called branded links. So traditionally, the only connection to reply that your messages will have is our tracking. So you can replace the domain reply on the tracking links with your own, and that'll just help be a little bit more kind of white label-ish when it comes to getting through layers of security from an email provider perspective. a lot of our clients won't make any changes here, and they will have opens on. I think having your opens enabled is far more valuable than not, simply
Yeah.
because if you turn it off, you're losing a huge chunk of what reply offers value wise, and you're not going to really be able to look at any of your sequences and make meaningful changes if you don't have that on. So I think leaving opens on by default is fine. You may want to be a little bit more thoughtful when it comes to the link tracking, like clicks specifically, because that would be an additional pixel on top of the opens tracking. But I'd say the vast majority of our clients leave opens on and they don't have any problems. So
Yeah. And while we're just quickly talking about deliverability, our next session is going to be dedicated to deliverability. So all things deliverability. So we're going to be talking about settings, we're going to be talking about branded links, we're even going to be talking about content to make sure that you have optimal deliverability. So we're going to reserve a whole hour for that. So it's always a good session, lots of good information there. So definitely
yeah.
come to that. We don't have any more questions. Josh, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up. A couple things I wanted to mention. So I did have on my list talking about number of links, optimal links, which we covered. I would say in terms of number of steps in a sequence, more so just email steps, we typically recommend about 4 to 6 in a sequence. There is data that shows that most people tend to open emails after the 3rd email that goes out. And then it's always nice to, take a look at your sequence, and maybe after step 4 or step 5, like Josh was showing you, take a look to see who's viewing those emails multiple times and segment out those people, maybe create a re-nurturing sequence if they haven't responded to you or haven't kind of acted upon that call to action that you have in those emails that you are sending. And Josh, I actually do have a quick question for you before we go. What would you say is the optimal number of variables to use per email in a sequence to create that feeling of it being personal, like you wrote that email just for that contact, but without it seeming automated? Like, where do you find that balance there?
So it does depend on the variables that you are using. So I think first name is always something that you want to include. Company is also something that you probably always want to include. From there, it really comes down to the information that you have at hand. So I think 3 variables is going to be the sweet spot. You want to directly address these emails to the person you're sending them to rather than the company at large, but you also want to have the company name in there to keep things professional and goal oriented. Your 3rd variable should be something specific, whether it be like a kind of timing thing. We have automated variables in our system that will change depending on the time of day. But more importantly, you can use that 3rd variable slot for a unique piece of information that you have on the client. The more directly relatable the message is to their specific use case, the more likely they're going to want to engage with you. So if you know something about their location, about something about them personally, about something their company has done recently, that's a good example of something to include there, to help make it seem like all of these messages are tailored to the individual rather than something that everybody is being emailed. That's why I think the first step with a super data-driven focus isn't the best way to go, because clearly this email is being sent to hundreds of people rather than being sent to me. And that just makes me not as interested in wanting to engage with it, because it's like getting a mail at my actual house and it says to homeowner rather than to Josh. To homeowner is nothing to do with me. I rent. So it's just a little bit more special and more just unique. So I think 3 is the sweet spot there.
Okay, I was going to say 3 as well. So I'm also really glad that we're on the same page, which means we're telling our customers the same things.
I've seen some instances where people will, like, their 3rd variable will be like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
So like you can get very specific with it. It doesn't just have to be a single word. So really that 3rd one should just be something that makes your email stand out. Maybe is more than just a name or a company tag.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So yeah, so it looks like we have about 6 minutes left. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. So I think we could probably wrap it up here. So thanks to everyone who joined us today. Like I said, our next session is probably going to be in about 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to dedicate it to all things deliverability. We are going to get our marketing team to send over this recording to everyone who attended today. So you should get that in a couple of days. And then if you have any questions, you know, Josh and I are always happy to help. You can reach out to our support team via live chat as well. Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us for almost an hour.
Thanks for listening to me drone on. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.